Picture this. You wake up one morning, stretch your arms, and realize something's horribly wrong. Your back feels like someone strapped a refrigerator to it. Your neck barely moves. You try to run, but your legs are so stubby, you're basically shuffling like an elderly person with hip problems. Congratulations! You've just experienced what it's like to be born as an Ankylosaurus. And trust me, it's not the power fantasy you might think it is. Now, before we dive into this prehistoric nightmare, let me paint you the full picture. We're talking about creatures that lived roughly 160 million years ago, during a time when the Earth was basically a giant death trap with teeth. These weren't the majestic, long-necked giants you see in movies, gracefully munching on treetops. No, these were nature's equivalent of a walking tank that got stuck in permanent traffic. And today, we're going to explore exactly why being born as one of these armored disasters was essentially winning the worst lottery in evolutionary history. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. Most people think having natural armor plating makes you invincible. They imagine these creatures as unstoppable juggernauts, crushing everything in their path. The reality? It's like being handed the world's heaviest suit of armor and being told to run a marathon every single day of your life. Let's start at the very beginning, 'cause that's where this tragic story really kicks off. You emerge from your egg, and immediately you're screwed. While other dinosaur babies are hatching with the ability to actually move around, you're basically a living paperweight. That adorable shell that's supposed to protect you, it's already weighing you down like you're carrying a backpack full of bricks. Your siblings are struggling just as much, and frankly, it's not a pretty sight. The first challenge you face is something most creatures take for granted: walking. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Your legs are so disproportionately small compared to your body that every step feels like you're trying to balance a boulder on toothpicks. The ground literally dents beneath your feet because you're already that heavy as a newborn. While other baby dinosaurs are learning to run from predators, you're learning the fine art of not falling over. And speaking of predators, let's talk about the neighborhood you've been born into. The Cretaceous period isn't exactly what you call family-friendly. This is prime real estate for creatures that view you as a slow-moving snack bar. Velociraptors are zipping around like feathered missiles. Massive carnivores are prowling the forests. And here you are, moving at the speed of geological time. Your defense strategy at this age is basically hope and prayer. You can't outrun anything. A determined squirrel could probably catch you. So your entire survival plan revolves around freezing in place and hoping whatever's hunting you gets bored and wanders off. It's like playing the world's most terrifying game of freeze tag, except the consequences of losing involve becoming something's lunch. But let's say you survive those first few weeks. Congratulations! You've now graduated to the next level of misery, feeding time. Other herbivores get to reach up and grab leaves from tall trees. They can browse at different heights, picking and choosing the best vegetation. You're stuck eating whatever grows at ankle level. It's like being permanently relegated to the kids' table, except the kids' table is covered in weeds and low-growing plants that taste like disappointment. Your diet becomes an exercise in quantity over quality. You need to consume massive amounts of plant matter just to keep your increasingly heavy body functioning. We're talking about shoving down roughly 50 kilograms of vegetation every single day. That's like eating an entire salad bar, including the sneeze guard. Your jaw is constantly working, grinding through tough, fibrous plants that would make a lawnmower struggle. And here's the kicker. As you grow, that armor that's supposed to be your greatest asset becomes your biggest burden. Each plate that develops on your back adds more weight. Those spikes that are growing along your sides, they're not just for show. They're heavy bone structures that you have to carry around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's like nature decided to give you a security system that requires you to be permanently exhausted. Your teenage years are when things get really interesting. Those cute little bumps on your back have now developed into full-scale armor plating. You're starting to look intimidating, sure, but you're also becoming increasingly immobile. Other dinosaurs your age are hitting growth spurts and becoming more agile. You're hitting growth spurts and becoming more like a living boulder. The spikes along your sides have transformed from rounded nubs into proper defensive weapons. They're sharp, they're intimidating, and they weigh a ton. Literally. Every time you try to move quickly, which isn't very quick to begin with, you can feel these things throwing off your balance. It's like trying to run while wearing a suit made of kitchen knives. Social interactions become incredibly awkward. Other herbivores can engage in complex herd behaviors, quick movements, and coordinated group activities. You waddle up to join them, and suddenly everyone has to slow down to accommodate your pace. You become the group's limiting factor, the one everyone has to wait for. It's prehistoric peer pressure at its finest. Romance. Don't even get me started. Imagine trying to impress a potential mate when your idea of fast movement looks like slow-motion replay footage. While other creatures can engage in elaborate courtship displays involving speed and agility, your romantic repertoire consists of standing there and hoping your armor plating catches the light in an attractive way. The worst part is that you're aware of your limitations. You can see other dinosaurs running, jumping, and moving with grace and speed. You watch them navigate their world with ease while you're stuck calculating whether that small hill is worth the energy expenditure it'll take to climb it. Every day becomes a series of strategic decisions about energy conservation. Weather becomes your enemy in ways other creatures never experience. Hot days mean you're essentially wearing a full-body heating pad that you can't remove. Those armor plates absorb and retain heat like a solar panel designed by someone who hates comfort. Cold days aren't much better because all that mass takes forever to warm up. You're either overheating or freezing with very little middle ground. Your daily routine becomes predictable in the most depressing way possible. Wake up slowly because sudden movements aren't really an option. Eat for hours because you need massive quantities of food. Move carefully to avoid expending unnecessary energy. Find shade or shelter depending on the weather. Repeat. It's like being trapped in the world's most boring video game, except There's no respawn button, and the graphics are way too realistic. The psychological toll is something most people don't consider. You're built like a tank, but you move like you're stuck in quicksand. Every day reinforces the fact that you're the slow kid in nature's class. You develop a complex about speed that would require millions of years of therapy to resolve, and we haven't even gotten to the really brutal parts yet. The predator encounters, the environmental challenges, the social dynamics of being the group's designated weak link, the competition for resources when you can barely compete for anything, the constant energy management required just to exist in a world that seems designed for creatures who can actually move at a reasonable pace. This is just the beginning of our journey into the prehistoric hellscape of Ankylosaurus existence. We've covered the basics of why starting life as one of these armored disasters sets you up for a lifetime of struggle. But trust me, it gets so much worse. The real nightmare scenarios are still coming, and they make everything we've discussed so far look like a casual stroll through the park. Let's talk about what happens when you finally reach what should be your prime. You're now a fully grown adult Ankylosaurus, and theoretically, this should be when life gets easier. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Your tail has now developed into what can only be described as nature's most impractical weapon. Picture this. You've got a massive bone club attached to the end of your spine that weighs more than most small cars. It's like someone decided to duct tape a wrecking ball to your backside and call it evolution. Sure, it looks intimidating, but try using the bathroom with that thing. Actually, don't think about that too hard. The club isn't just heavy, it's completely unwieldy. When you swing it, which takes approximately 3 business days to complete the motion, you have to plan ahead like you're launching a space mission. You can't just react to threats. You have to anticipate where they'll be by the time your tail finishes its glacial arc through the air. It's like trying to play tennis with a telephone pole. And here's the real kicker about your fancy tail weapon. Most of the time, you can't even use it effectively because you're too worried about hitting yourself. One miscalculated swing and you're knocking yourself unconscious with your own defense mechanism. It's the prehistoric equivalent of bringing a bazooka to a knife fight, except the bazooka might explode in your face. But wait, there's more. Your armor plating has now reached its full ridiculous potential. You're essentially wearing a full suit of bone armor that you can never take off. Ever. It's like being permanently trapped in medieval plate mail, except it's growing directly out of your body. The weight distribution is completely wrong for any kind of efficient movement. You're top heavy, back heavy, and generally heavy in all the wrong places. The spikes along your sides have reached their maximum intimidation factor, which means they've also reached their maximum inconvenience factor. Trying to lie down for a nap becomes an engineering challenge. You can't just flop over like other animals. You have to carefully position yourself to avoid impaling the ground, other creatures, or worst of all, yourself. Sleep becomes a tactical operation requiring advanced planning and precise execution. Your neck mobility is practically non-existent at this point. While other creatures can look around, scan for threats, or even scratch an itch in their back, you're stuck with whatever's directly in front of you. Want to see what's behind you? Tough luck. You'll need to execute a 17-point turn that takes roughly half an hour to complete. By the time you've rotated to check for danger, whatever was threatening you has either left, eaten someone else, or died of old age. Navigation becomes a nightmare of epic proportions. Other dinosaurs can weave through forests, navigate around obstacles, and take shortcuts. You're basically a living bulldozer that has to go through everything instead of around it. See a fallen log? You're not stepping over it, you're demolishing it. Dense vegetation. You're creating a new path whether the forest likes it or not. You leave a trail of destruction everywhere you go, not because you're aggressive, but because you literally cannot avoid obstacles. The social implications of your existence reach peak awkwardness during this phase. Other herbivores form complex social hierarchies based on things like speed, agility, and intelligence. You form social hierarchies based on who can tolerate your presence without getting accidentally impaled. Making friends becomes a liability assessment for everyone involved. Mating season arrives like a cruel joke from the universe. While other creatures engage in elaborate courtship displays involving dancing, racing, and showing off their athletic abilities, your romantic strategy consists of standing very still and hoping someone notices your armor plating in a positive light. Your pickup lines are limited to demonstrating that you won't accidentally crush your potential partner during intimate moments. Romance is less about chemistry and more about structural engineering. When you do find a mate, the logistics of reproduction become a puzzle that would challenge NASA scientists. Everything about your body is designed to keep other creatures away, including the ones you actually want to get close to. It's like trying to hug someone while wearing a suit made of knives and carrying a wrecking ball. The species continues to exist despite your anatomy, not because of it. Raising offspring becomes an exercise in creative parenting. You can't chase after your babies when they wander off because you move like continental drift. You can't provide them with protection through mobility because you don't have any. Your parenting strategy is basically to park yourself in one spot and hope your children don't venture beyond your extremely limited sphere of influence. The environmental challenges reach their peak during your adult years. Climate change happens, and while other species can migrate to more suitable habitats, you're stuck dealing with whatever nature throws at you. Drought? You'll walk incredibly slowly to find water. Floods? You'll stand there and hope you don't sink into the mud. Volcanic eruptions? You'll lumber away at a pace that makes glaciers look speedy and pray the lava flows are equally sluggish. Food competition becomes brutal when you're operating at such a disadvantage. Other herbivores can quickly move from depleted areas to fresh feeding grounds. You arrive at the scene like the world's slowest food critic, only to discover that everything good has already been consumed. You're perpetually eating the prehistoric equivalent of stale bread, while everyone else enjoys the good stuff. Your digestive system has to work overtime to process the massive quantities of low-quality vegetation you're forced to consume. You're basically a walking compost pile, constantly grinding through plant matter that other creatures wouldn't even consider food. Your stomach is working harder than a garbage disposal at a vegetarian restaurant. The weight management situation becomes critical as you age. Every pound you gain makes movement even more difficult, but you need to maintain your size to avoid becoming prey. It's a catch-22 that would drive a fitness coach to tears. You're simultaneously too heavy to move efficiently and too dependent on your size for survival to lose weight. Territory defense becomes a comedy of errors. When another Ankylosaurus wanders into your space, the resulting confrontation looks like two armored glaciers, slowly bumping into each other. These territorial disputes can last for hours because nobody can move fast enough to either attack effectively or retreat quickly. It's like watching a fight scene filmed in extreme slow motion. Your daily energy budget becomes a mathematical nightmare. Every movement has to be calculated against its energy cost. Walking to a new feeding area might use more calories than you'll gain from the food you find there. You become an unwilling expert in prehistoric energy economics, constantly making calculations that would challenge an accountant. The maintenance requirements for your body are absolutely ridiculous. Those armor plates need constant care to prevent infections and parasites. Your spikes require regular cleaning to prevent debris buildup. Your tail club needs to be kept in working condition despite never being used effectively. You're like a living piece of military equipment that requires a full-time maintenance crew, except you are the maintenance crew. Social isolation becomes inevitable as you age. The energy cost of maintaining social relationships becomes too high when every interaction requires careful positioning to avoid accidental injury. You become a hermit, not by choice, but by necessity. Your armor, designed to protect you from others, ends up protecting others from you while simultaneously protecting you from meaningful social contact. Your legacy as an adult Ankylosaurus is essentially being a living monument to evolutionary over-engineering. You're proof that sometimes nature's solutions create more problems than they solve. You're the prehistoric equivalent of a luxury car that's too expensive to drive, too complicated to maintain, and too impractical for daily use. And somehow, despite all these challenges, despite the crushing weight of your own defensive adaptations, despite being essentially a prisoner in your own body, you continue to exist. You lumber through prehistoric landscapes like a walking tank that forgot how to tank, leaving a trail of destruction and confusion in your wake. You're not thriving, you're not conquering, you're simply enduring in the most inefficient way possible. But the story doesn't end here. We haven't even covered the worst parts yet. The predator encounters that turn into epic slow-motion battles. The environmental disasters that you can't escape from. The social dynamics that make high school seem like a friendly gathering. The daily struggles that would make surviving in the modern world look like a vacation. The worst part about reaching your supposed prime as an Ankylosaurus isn't just the physical limitations, it's the crushing realization that you've become a victim of your own success. Every piece of armor that grows makes you safer, but more miserable. Every spike that develops gives you better defense, but worse mobility. You're trapped in an evolutionary prison of your own making, and there's no parole board in sight. Let's talk about what happens when you actually encounter the predators your armor is supposedly designed to handle. Picture this scenario. You're peacefully munching on some ferns, which takes about 45 minutes because everything takes forever when you're essentially a walking fortress. Suddenly, the ground starts vibrating. Birds scatter. Your incredibly slow nervous system finally registers that something big is approaching. Enter the Tyrannosaurus rex. This thing is essentially a freight train with teeth, and it's looking at you like you're a prehistoric Happy Meal. Now, this should be your moment to shine, right? All that armor, all those spikes, that massive tail club, this is what you were built for. Except there's one tiny problem. By the time you register the threat, process the information through your walnut-sized brain, and attempt to turn around to face it, the T-Rex has already circled you 3 times and probably filed its taxes. Your defensive strategy consists entirely of hoping the predator attacks you from the front, where you can maybe, possibly, if you're incredibly lucky, use your tail club. But here's the thing about predators. They didn't survive millions of years of evolution by being stupid. They figured out that your backside might as well have a giant sign that says, "Attack here for easy access to delicious dinosaur meat." When you finally manage to position yourself for combat, which takes approximately the same amount of time it takes for mountains to form, the actual fight becomes a masterclass in inefficiency. You swing your tail club with all the speed and grace of a wrecking ball operated by someone who's never seen construction equipment before. The T-Rex, meanwhile, is dancing around you like a ballerina with anger management issues. If you do manage to connect with your tail weapon, congratulations. You've just discovered the next problem. That club is so heavy and unwieldy that after one swing, you're completely off balance and vulnerable for the next geological era. It's like firing a cannon while standing on roller skates. Sure, it might hurt if it hits, but good luck maintaining any kind of fighting stance afterward. The psychological warfare is even worse than the physical combat. Predators have learned that they don't actually need to attack you directly. They can just follow you around, staying just outside your pathetically small range of effective defense, and wait for you to die of exhaustion from trying to keep up with them. It's like being stalked by someone who walks slightly faster than you can manage, except the consequences of giving up involve becoming lunch. Your armor, which should make you feel invincible, becomes a source of constant anxiety. Every scrape, every dent, every chip in your protective plating represents a potential weak point that clever predators might exploit. You become obsessed with armor maintenance, spending hours trying to position yourself to clean and inspect plates that you can barely reach. It's like owning a car that requires constant body work, except the car is your body, and you can't trade it in for a newer model. The camouflage situation is absolutely hopeless. While other herbivores can blend into their environment or hide behind vegetation, you're about as subtle as a neon sign in a library. Your spikes catch sunlight, your armor plates reflect light, and your massive bulk creates shadows that can be seen from orbit. Stealth is not an option when you're essentially a walking advertisement for your own presence. Weather becomes your nemesis in ways that would make meteorologists weep. During hot seasons, your armor plating turns you into a walking oven. The metal-like bone structures absorb and retain heat until you're basically slow cooking yourself from the outside in. You spend entire days trying to find shade large enough to accommodate your ridiculous proportions, which is like trying to park a freight train under a beach umbrella. Cold weather presents the opposite, but equally miserable problem. Your massive body mass takes forever to warm up, and once you're cold, you stay cold for approximately 3 ice ages. You become a dinosaur popsicle, moving even slower than usual while your metabolism struggles to generate enough heat to keep your oversized body functioning. Rain is particularly cruel because it adds weight to your already impossible burden. Water collects in the grooves of your armor plating, between your spikes, and in every crevice of your defensive equipment. You become even heavier and more cumbersome, if such a thing's possible. It's like wearing a sponge suit during a thunderstorm while carrying a refrigerator on your back. The feeding situation reaches peak absurdity during your adult years. You need massive quantities of vegetation just to maintain your bulk, but you can only reach plants that grow within a very specific height range. Too low, and you can't bend down without risking permanent damage to your spine. Too high, and you might as well be trying to eat clouds. Your dining options are limited to whatever grows in the narrow band between your minimum and maximum reach. Competition for food becomes a nightmare when you're operating at such a severe speed disadvantage. Other herbivores can quickly move from depleted feeding areas to fresh vegetation. You arrive at prime feeding spots like the world's slowest food critic, only to find that everything edible has been consumed by faster, more efficient creatures. You're perpetually eating the prehistoric equivalent of table scraps. Your jaw muscles work overtime trying to process the enormous quantities of tough, fibrous plant matter you're forced to consume. Chewing becomes a full-time job that requires more energy than most creatures use for their entire daily routine. You're basically a living wood chipper, except wood chippers are designed to be efficient, and you're designed to be a walking fortress that forgot how to walk properly. Territory management becomes an exercise in futility when you can barely manage to traverse your own domain. Other creatures can patrol their territories, mark boundaries, and respond quickly to incursions. Your territory management strategy consists of standing in one spot and hoping that your presence is intimidating enough to deter trespassers. It's like trying to be a security guard while chained to a desk. Social hierarchies among your own species become based entirely on who can avoid accidentally impaling each other during interactions. Dominance displays involve incredibly slow-motion posturing that looks like a dance performed underwater by creatures wearing full suits of armor. These confrontations can last for days because nobody can move fast enough to either establish dominance or admit defeat quickly. Mating becomes a logistical nightmare that would challenge urban planners. Finding a compatible partner is difficult enough when you're essentially a walking weapon, but the actual mechanics of reproduction require careful choreography to avoid mutual destruction. Romance dies a slow death when every intimate moment requires safety protocols and advanced planning. Your offspring present their own unique challenges. You can't chase after them when they wander into danger because you move like continental drift. You can't protect them through mobility because you don't have any. Your parenting strategy consists of parking yourself in one location and hoping your children don't venture beyond your extremely limited sphere of influence. It's like being a lighthouse parent, except lighthouses don't have to worry about accidentally stepping on their own children. Sleep becomes a strategic operation requiring advanced planning and precise execution. You can't just lie down anywhere because your spikes and armor plating require specific positioning to avoid injury. Finding a comfortable sleeping position is like solving a three-dimensional puzzle where every wrong move results in self-inflicted wounds. You spend more time arranging yourself for sleep than actually sleeping. Personal hygiene reaches levels of complexity that would challenge a team of engineers. Those armor plates trap dirt, debris, and parasites in places you can't reach. Your spikes collect vegetation, mud, and various unidentifiable substances that you have no way of removing. You're basically a walking ecosystem hosting entire communities of organisms that you can't evict because you can't reach them. The maintenance requirements for your body become a full-time occupation. Every plate needs inspection for damage. Every spike requires cleaning to prevent infection. Your tail club needs constant care to remain functional, despite never being used effectively. You're like a vintage car that requires more maintenance time than driving time, except you can't hire a mechanic, and you can't trade yourself in for a more practical model. Your digestive system works harder than a garbage disposal at a vegetarian convention, constantly processing massive quantities of low-quality plant matter. You're essentially a walking compost operation, turning vast amounts of vegetation into fertilizer with the efficiency of a broken machine. Your stomach rumbles so loudly that it scares away both prey and predators, which would be helpful if scaring things away was actually your goal. Navigation through dense forests becomes an exercise in creative destruction. You can't go around obstacles, so you have to go through them. Every journey becomes a landscaping project as you inadvertently clear paths, knock down trees, and rearrange the local geography. You leave a trail of environmental damage wherever you go, not out of malice, but out of sheer physical impossibility of moving through the world without destroying it. The energy economics of your existence become a mathematical nightmare that would challenge an accounting firm. Every movement must be calculated against its energy cost. Walking to a new feeding area might burn more calories than you'll gain from the food you find there. You become an unwilling expert in prehistoric energy management, constantly making calculations that determine whether any given action is worth the metabolic investment. Your legacy as an adult Ankylosaurus is essentially being a living testament to evolutionary over-engineering. You're proof that sometimes nature's solutions create more problems than they solve. You're the biological equivalent of a luxury sports car that's too expensive to drive, too complicated to maintain, and too impractical for actual transportation needs. And yet, despite all these challenges, despite being essentially trapped in a prison of your own evolutionary adaptations, you continue to exist. You lumber through prehistoric landscapes like a confused tank that lost its manual, leaving a wake of destruction and bewilderment behind you. You're not conquering your environment. You're not thriving in your ecosystem. You're simply enduring in the most spectacularly inefficient way that natural selection has ever produced. But we're still not done exploring this evolutionary disaster. The real nightmare scenarios are yet to come. The environmental catastrophes you can't escape from. The social dynamics that make surviving seem impossible. The daily struggles that would make modern problems seem like minor inconveniences. The predator encounters that turn survival into a game of slow-motion chess, where every move takes an hour and every mistake is potentially fatal. The twilight years of your Ankylosaurus existence bring a whole new level of misery that makes everything we've discussed so far look like a pleasant warm-up. Your body has now reached peak dysfunction, and every system that was already working against you has decided to double down on the torture. Your joints, which were never designed to handle this much weight in the first place, start giving out like a building with a faulty foundation. Every step becomes a symphony of creaking, popping, and grinding sounds that can be heard from 3 territories away. You're basically a walking advertisement for joint replacement surgery in an era where the closest thing to medical care is hoping a meteor doesn't land on your head. The spikes along your sides have grown so large and unwieldy that they've started interfering with each other. It's like wearing a jacket made of swords that keeps getting caught on itself. Simple movements become exercises in advanced geometry as you try to position your body in ways that don't result in self-inflicted puncture wounds. You've become a danger to yourself in ways that would impress a safety inspector. Your tail club has reached maximum ridiculous proportions. This thing is now so massive that it affects your center of gravity, to the point where standing still requires active concentration. It's like trying to balance while wearing a bowling ball as a hat, except the bowling ball is attached to your spine and weighs more than a small building. One wrong shift and you're toppling over like a poorly designed statue. But here's where things get really depressing. Your brain, which was never your strong suit to begin with, starts showing signs of wear from decades of being rattled around inside your armored skull. Every impact, every fall, every time you've accidentally bonked your head on low-hanging branches has taken its toll. You're developing the prehistoric equivalent of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, except there's no medical team to help you, and no retirement plan. Memory becomes increasingly unreliable. You forget which plants make you sick, which territories belong to aggressive neighbors, and sometimes even which direction you were traveling. Navigation, which was already challenging when you could think clearly, becomes a nightmare of confusion and wrong turns. You wander in circles for days, leaving a trail of destruction that loops back on itself like the world's most depressing crop circle. Your digestive system, after decades of processing massive quantities of fibrous plant matter, starts breaking down like an overworked garbage disposal. Stomach problems become a constant companion, turning your already miserable existence into a symphony of digestive distress. You're basically a walking antacid commercial, except antacids haven't been invented yet and won't be for another 160 million years. The armor plating that once made you feel secure now feels like a death sentence. Those protective plates have become so thick and heavy that they're crushing your internal organs. Your lungs struggle to expand against the weight pressing down on your chest. Your heart works overtime trying to pump blood through a body that's essentially being compressed by its own defensive equipment. Sleep becomes impossible. Your armor has grown to the point where there's literally no comfortable position for rest. Every attempt to lie down results in some spike or plate digging into either the ground or your own body. You spend nights standing upright, swaying slightly like a tired security guard, catching microsecond naps while trying not to fall over and become a prehistoric pancake. The social isolation reaches peak loneliness. Other ankylosaurs avoid you because you've become too unpredictable and dangerous to be around. Your own species treats you like a walking hazard zone. You're too slow to keep up with anyone, too heavy to be welcomed anywhere, and too unstable to be trusted around offspring. You become the dinosaur equivalent of that relative nobody wants to invite to family gatherings. Seasonal changes hit you like natural disasters. Your massive body takes so long to adjust to temperature variations that you're perpetually uncomfortable. When winter arrives, you're still trying to cool down from summer. When spring comes, you're still trying to warm up from winter. You exist in a constant state of being climatically out of sync with the world around you. Food becomes increasingly difficult to process. Your worn-down teeth struggle with even the softest vegetation. Eating becomes a laborious process that takes most of your waking hours, and even then, you're barely extracting enough nutrition to keep your oversized body functioning. You're essentially starving in slow motion while surrounded by food you can't properly digest. The psychological toll becomes unbearable. You've lived long enough to watch other species evolve, adapt, and thrive, while you've remained trapped in the same dysfunctional body design. You see smaller, faster creatures living better lives with a fraction of your defensive equipment. It's like being forced to watch everyone else succeed while you're stuck in a job you hate but can never quit. Your territory becomes smaller and smaller as you lose the energy to patrol even basic boundaries. Other creatures start encroaching on your space because they know you can't effectively defend it anymore. You become a squatter in your own home, watching helplessly as your domain shrinks around you like a slowly deflating balloon. The daily routine becomes a series of survival calculations. How much energy can you spend walking to better food sources? Is it worth the effort to move to shade when the sun gets too hot? Should you attempt to defend your territory or just hope the intruders leave on their own? Every decision becomes a life or death mathematical equation with no good answers. Predators start viewing you differently. You're no longer seen as a dangerous tank to be avoided, but as a slow-moving target that's probably too tired to fight back effectively. Younger, cockier carnivores start testing your defenses, probing for weaknesses like prehistoric bullies picking on the elderly kid with mobility issues. Your clubtail, once your pride and theoretical joy, becomes more liability than asset. The muscles required to swing it have weakened from decades of carrying its weight. When you do attempt to use it in defense, the swing is so slow and telegraphed that predators have time to order lunch, eat it, and still dodge out of the way. It's like trying to fight with a weapon made of lead while wearing mittens filled with molasses. The maintenance of your body becomes impossible. Those hard-to-reach places have accumulated decades of debris, parasites, and infections that you can't address. You're essentially a walking biological disaster area, hosting entire ecosystems of organisms that view you as prime real estate. You've become less of a dinosaur and more of a mobile habitat for smaller creatures. Weather events that other animals can escape become death sentences for you. When storms hit, you can't seek shelter quickly enough. When floods come, you can't reach higher ground in time. When droughts occur, you can't travel to distant water sources. You're at the mercy of every environmental change, watching helplessly as more mobile creatures adapt, while you're stuck dealing with whatever nature throws at you. Your offspring, if you've managed to have any, have long since grown up and moved on to their own territories. They visit occasionally, but even family interactions become strained when your presence is a constant safety hazard. You accidentally step on their food, knock over their shelters, and generally make their lives more difficult just by existing in their vicinity. The loneliness becomes crushing. You haven't had a meaningful conversation with another creature in years, partly because communication requires energy you don't have, and partly because everyone who gets close enough to talk runs the risk of being accidentally impaled. You develop the prehistoric equivalent of cabin fever, except your cabin is your own body, and you can never leave. Sleep deprivation starts affecting every aspect of your existence. Without proper rest, your already compromised mental faculties deteriorate further. You make increasingly poor decisions, wander into dangerous territories, and sometimes forget to eat for days at a time. You're essentially running on empty while carrying a load that would challenge a freight train. Your digestive system reaches the point where it can barely process anything. The constant grinding of tough plant matter has worn down your internal machinery to the point where even the softest vegetation causes problems. You're literally starving while eating, unable to extract enough nutrition from food to sustain your massive bulk. The armor that once protected you now actively works against your survival. Those defensive plates have become so thick that they're interfering with your circulation. Your limbs don't get adequate blood flow, leading to numbness and reduced mobility. You're essentially being slowly strangled by your own protective equipment. Territory disputes become exercises in humiliation. When younger, healthier Ankylosaurs challenge your boundaries, you can't put up effective resistance. These confrontations are less like battles and more like watching someone slowly push over a statue. You lose ground not through defeat in combat, but through simple inability to maintain your position. The final insult comes when you realize that your evolutionary design has trapped you in a body that's actively working to end your existence. Every defensive adaptation that was supposed to help you survive has become a factor in your decline. Your armor is too heavy, your weapons are too unwieldy, your size is too burdensome, and your mobility is too limited. You've become a walking contradiction, a creature whose protective mechanisms have become the very things that make protection impossible. Your shell is both shield and prison. Your weapons are both defense and liability. Your size is both advantage and curse. You're trapped in an evolutionary design that prioritized short-term survival over long-term viability. As you lumber through your final days, moving slower than geological processes, you represent the ultimate cautionary tale about evolutionary overengineering. You're proof that sometimes nature's solutions can become problems, that defensive adaptations can become offensive burdens, and that surviving long enough to reproduce doesn't necessarily mean thriving. Your legacy will be that of a creature who won the evolutionary lottery by losing at the game of life. Future paleontologists will marvel at your defensive capabilities while completely missing the point that those very capabilities made your existence a prolonged exercise in mobile misery. You're not just dying slowly. You're dying while carrying the weight of millions of years of evolutionary mistakes on your back. Every step toward your inevitable end is taken while dragging the evidence of nature's occasional tendency to overthink simple problems. And through it all, you continue to exist, not because you're thriving, not because you're successful, but because extinction is apparently the only thing that moves slower than you do. You're locked in a race with oblivion, and for once in your life, you might actually be winning by going slow. But even this isn't the end of the story. Even as your individual existence becomes increasingly unbearable, the species continues, passing on these same design flaws to new generations who will face the same challenges, the same limitations, and the same crushing weight of evolutionary overambition. The cycle continues, each new Ankylosaurus born into the same biological trap, destined to repeat the same struggles, the same limitations, and the same slow-motion tragedy that has defined your entire existence. And that might just be the most depressing part of all. The nightmare doesn't end with your miserable existence. Oh no, that would be too merciful. Instead, nature decides to add one final layer of cosmic cruelty to this evolutionary disaster. Environmental catastrophe strikes, and guess what? You can't do a damn thing about it. Picture this scenario. Volcanic activity starts ramping up across the region. Ash clouds are rolling in like prehistoric storm fronts. And the smart money is on getting the hell out of Dodge. Every other species in your ecosystem is already packing up and migrating to safer territories. Birds are flying south, mammals are scurrying to underground burrows, and even the plants seem to be leaning away from the volcanic activity. You're still trying to figure out which direction is away from the danger. By the time your walnut-sized brain processes the threat level, everyone else has already evacuated. You're like the last person at a party who doesn't realize the building is on fire. Except instead of just being embarrassing, this situation is actively trying to kill you. the ash starts falling, and this is where things get spectacularly worse. That armor plating you've been lugging around your entire life, it's now collecting volcanic debris like the world's most inefficient dustpan. Every groove, every spike, every defensive plate becomes a collection point for toxic ash that you can't clean off. You're essentially turning yourself into a walking hazard zone, accumulating environmental toxins that would make a hazmat team nervous. Your breathing becomes labored as the air quality deteriorates. Those tiny nostrils that were never designed for efficiency are now struggling to filter out particles that are actively trying to kill you. You're basically trying to breathe through a straw while someone throws sand at your face. The irony isn't lost that your defensive armor, designed to keep bad things out, is now trapping bad things in. Meanwhile, the temperature starts dropping as the ash blocks out sunlight. Remember how your massive body takes forever to adjust to temperature changes? Well, congratulations. You're now experiencing prehistoric climate change in real time, and your biological thermostat is about as responsive as a broken air conditioner. You're getting colder by the hour while being physically incapable of generating enough heat to compensate. Food sources start disappearing as vegetation dies off from lack of sunlight and toxic ash exposure. The plants you depend on for survival are withering away faster than your ability to find new ones. You're watching your entire food supply vanish, while being completely unable to adapt quickly enough to find alternatives. It's like being on a sinking ship where the lifeboats are moving too fast for you to catch. Other herbivores are switching to different plant species, changing their diets and adapting their feeding behaviors. You're still trying to eat the same plants you've always eaten, even as they become increasingly scarce and toxic. Your dietary inflexibility, once just an inconvenience, has now become a death sentence. You're the pickiest eater in a world where being picky means starving. The migration patterns of other species leave you completely isolated. Herds that you've shared territories with for years are moving to safer regions at speeds you can't match. You watch helplessly as your neighbors disappear over the horizon, leaving you alone in an increasingly hostile environment. You're like a broken-down car on a highway where all the other vehicles have already passed you by. Water sources start becoming contaminated with volcanic runoff and ash. The few streams and ponds in your territory turn into toxic soup that even your robust digestive system can't handle. You're faced with the choice between dying of dehydration or dying of poisoning, which isn't really much of a choice at all. Flavors of death. Your already compromised mobility becomes, it's like being offered a selection of different critical liability when the ground itself starts changing. Lava flows, even slow-moving ones, travel faster than you can escape. You're essentially racing against liquid rock and losing. The landscape you've known your entire life is being rewritten by geological forces, and you're too slow to keep up with the revisions. Smaller, more agile creatures are finding refuge in caves, underground tunnels, and elevated areas that you can't access. Your size, once your only advantage, now prevents you from seeking shelter in the very places that might save your life. You're too big for the lifeboats and too slow to swim to safety, It's the ultimate cruel joke of evolutionary design. The stress of the environmental crisis starts affecting your already fragile health. Your immune system, weakened by years of carrying excessive weight and dealing with chronic inflammation from your armor, can't cope with the additional toxins in your environment. You're essentially fighting a war on multiple fronts with weapons that don't work and armor that's actively making things worse. Sleep becomes impossible as the ground continues to shake with seismic activity. Your already challenging rest requirements are now complicated by the constant threat of volcanic activity. You spend nights standing upright, swaying with exhaustion, while the earth literally moves beneath your feet. It's like trying to sleep during an earthquake while wearing a suit made of anvils. The psychological impact of watching your world literally end around you while being powerless to escape adds a new dimension to your suffering. You're experiencing the prehistoric equivalent of climate anxiety, except your anxiety is completely justified, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. You're a front-row spectator to your own extinction event. Food chain disruptions cascade through the ecosystem, affecting even the plants you can still reach. The insects that pollinate your food sources are dying off. The soil chemistry is changing due to volcanic deposits. The entire web of life that supports your existence is unraveling faster than you can adapt. You're watching the foundations of your world crumble in slow motion. Other Ankylosaurus in the region are facing the same impossible situation. Your species gatherings, once rare social events, become desperate conferences of the doomed. Groups of armored dinosaurs standing around looking at each other with the prehistoric equivalent of, "Well, this sucks," expressions. You're all in the same sinking boat, and none of you can row fast enough to reach shore. The volcanic winter that follows the initial eruption creates conditions that your metabolism simply can't handle. Your body, designed for warm, stable climates, starts shutting down non-essential functions to conserve energy. Unfortunately, when you're already operating at minimum efficiency, losing any functionality is catastrophic. You're like a machine that was barely working, being asked to operate in conditions it was never designed for. Territory boundaries become meaningless when the territory itself is being destroyed. Your carefully maintained domain is being reshaped by lava flows, ash deposits, and seismic activity. The landmarks you've used for navigation are disappearing or being moved by geological forces. You're essentially trying to live in a house while it's being demolished around you. The few remaining food sources become battlegrounds as desperate herbivores compete for increasingly scarce resources. You're forced to fight for vegetation that wouldn't have been considered edible during normal times. Your combat capabilities, already questionable, are further compromised by environmental stress and malnutrition. You're bringing a broken weapon to a food fight. Water becomes so scarce that you have to choose between staying near contaminated sources or attempting to travel to cleaner water that might not exist or might be too far away to reach. Every decision becomes a gamble with your life as the stakes. You're playing prehistoric roulette where every chamber is loaded. The air quality deteriorates to the point where even breathing becomes a conscious effort. Your respiratory system, never particularly efficient, is now working overtime to extract oxygen from atmosphere that's more ash than air. You're essentially suffocating slowly while being unable to do anything about it. It's like trying to breathe through a pillow that someone keeps making thicker. Your armor, which collected ash and debris during the initial stages of the crisis, has now become a permanent repository for toxic materials. You're carrying around your own personal pollution cloud, unable to clean yourself and unable to avoid continued contamination. You've become a walking example of environmental disaster, both victim and symptom of the catastrophe. The temperature fluctuations caused by volcanic activity create conditions that your body simply can't regulate. You're too hot during the day when volcanic activity increases, and too cold at night when ash clouds block residual heat. Your internal thermostat, already unreliable, gives up entirely. You're basically a broken heating system in a house during the worst weather in history. Communication with other survivors becomes impossible due to the environmental noise. Volcanic rumbling, ash storms, and seismic activity create a constant background roar that drowns out any attempt at social interaction. You're isolated not just by your mobility limitations, but by the literal inability to hear or be heard above the chaos. You're alone in a crowd of fellow sufferers. The realization slowly dawns that this isn't a temporary crisis that you can wait out. This is permanent environmental change happening faster than your species can adapt. You're witnessing the end of your world in real time while being completely powerless to prevent it. It's like watching your house burn down while being chained to a chair in the front yard. Your daily routine, such as it was, becomes entirely focused on basic survival tasks that are becoming increasingly impossible. Finding breathable air, locating uncontaminated water, seeking edible vegetation, and avoiding immediate geological hazards consume all your time and energy. You're no longer living. You're just postponing dying. The irony becomes apparent that all your defensive adaptations are useless against environmental threats. Your armor doesn't protect you from toxic air. Your spikes don't defend you from volcanic ash. Your massive size doesn't help you escape changing climate conditions. You're the ultimate example of being prepared for the wrong kind of war. Sleep deprivation from constant environmental stress starts affecting your already limited cognitive abilities. You make increasingly poor decisions about where to go, what to eat, and how to respond to immediate threats. You're essentially losing your mind while your body falls apart in an environment that's actively trying to kill you. It's a perfect storm of prehistoric misery. The final cruel irony is that your species' evolutionary strategy of prioritizing defense over mobility has trapped you in a situation where defense is useless and mobility is essential. You're like a tank in a flood, perfectly designed for the wrong type of disaster. Your evolutionary heritage has become your evolutionary death sentence. And through it all, you continue to exist, not because you're successfully adapting to the crisis, but because dying apparently takes longer than living when you're built like a walking fortress. You're locked in a race between extinction and adaptation, and you're losing so slowly that it's almost worse than losing quickly. The environmental catastrophe doesn't just threaten your individual survival. It threatens the continuation of your entire evolutionary line. Every challenge you've faced, every adaptation your ancestors developed, every defensive mechanism that defined your species, all of it becomes meaningless in the face of environmental change that moves faster than evolutionary response time. You're not just experiencing personal extinction, you're witnessing species extinction, evolutionary extinction, and ecological extinction all at the same time. You're the last chapter in a very long book about why sometimes nature's solutions become nature's problems when the environment changes faster than biology can adapt. This is the final insult in a lifetime of biological cruel jokes. After surviving predators, navigating social challenges, enduring physical limitations, and dealing with the daily misery of existence in an impractical body, you're being eliminated by forces that don't even recognize you as a threat worth addressing personally. The volcano doesn't care about your armor. The climate doesn't respect your defensive capabilities. The changing ecosystem doesn't accommodate your mobility limitations. You're being erased by indifferent environmental forces that treat you exactly the same as every other creature, except every other creature can actually respond effectively to the crisis. Your legacy becomes that of a species that was perfectly adapted for conditions that no longer exist, leaving behind only fossils that future scientists will study while wondering how something so seemingly well defended could disappear so completely. You're about to become a prehistoric mystery, a biological question mark that paleontologists will debate for millions of years. And the most depressing part, even your extinction is going to be slow, inefficient, and probably involve a lot of standing around waiting for the inevitable while being unable to do anything meaningful about it. Even dying, you can't escape the fundamental design flaw of your existence. Everything takes forever, and nothing works quite right. But that's not even the end of this evolutionary tragedy, because even as individuals and species face extinction, the biological mistakes that created your miserable existence don't disappear. They get preserved in the fossil record as a permanent reminder that sometimes evolution gets things spectacularly wrong, and the consequences can last for geological timescales. You're not just dying. You're becoming a cautionary tale written in stone, a permanent record of what happens when defensive evolution goes too far and environmental change moves too fast. Your bones will outlast your species memory, and probably several other species that will evolve, thrive, and go extinct in the time it takes for your fossils to erode. The ultimate irony is that your remains will be better preserved than those of more successful species, because your heavy bone structure fossilizes more readily. Future paleontologists will have excellent records of your species' anatomy, while having very little information about the more successful creatures that actually thrived in prehistoric ecosystems. You'll be overrepresented in the fossil record, making it look like you were more successful than you actually were. Even in death, you can't escape the fundamental unfairness of your evolutionary design. Your failure will be remembered more clearly than other species' successes. your limitations will be studied more thoroughly than other creatures' adaptations, and your extinction will be better documented than other species' survival strategies. This is your final legacy, being a very well-preserved example of evolutionary over-engineering, a permanent reminder that sometimes nature's solutions become nature's problems, and that being memorable isn't the same thing as being successful. Your fossilized remains become the prehistoric equivalent of a participation trophy that nobody wanted. Scientists will spend decades trying to figure out how something so heavily armored could be so fundamentally unsuccessful at the basic task of not going extinct. Your bones will be displayed in museums with plaques that essentially read, "Here's what happens when evolution tries too hard and fails anyway." The research papers written about your species will be exercises in academic confusion. Paleontologists will marvel at your defensive capabilities while completely missing the point that those very defenses made your daily existence a prolonged nightmare. They'll theorize about your combat effectiveness while ignoring the fact that you were about as combat effective as a bowling ball trying to play tennis. Future documentaries will portray you as a mighty armored warrior, complete with dramatic music and slow-motion battle sequences. The reality of your existence, standing around confused and barely able to move, doesn't make for compelling television. Hollywood will turn your pathetic shuffle into a heroic march, your desperate survival into epic adventures, and your evolutionary failures into triumphant adaptations. Children will play with toy versions of you, imagining epic battles and prehistoric adventures that bear no resemblance to your actual experience. These plastic representations will be more mobile than you ever were, with joints that actually bend and tails that swing without throwing the entire figure off balance. Even your toys will be better designed than your actual body. The scientific community will debate your extinction for centuries, proposing complex theories about climate change, asteroid impacts, and ecosystem collapse. They'll miss the obvious explanation that you were simply too poorly designed to function effectively in any environment. Your extinction wasn't a mystery, it was inevitable. You were a biological dead end that took millions of years to figure out it was already dead. Museum visitors will look at your reconstructed skeleton and imagine a fearsome prehistoric tank. They won't see the creature that spent its entire existence as a prisoner in its own body, unable to run, barely able to eat, and constantly exhausted from carrying around defensive equipment that never actually worked as advertised. Your skeleton tells a story of strength that your life never experienced. The most depressing part about your post-mortem fame is that it's based on a complete misunderstanding of what your existence was actually like. You'll be remembered as a success story when you were actually a cautionary tale. Your image will inspire awe when it should inspire pity. Your legacy will be built on a fundamental misinterpretation of your biological reality. Educational programs will use your species as an example of successful adaptation, completely ignoring the fact that your adaptations were actively working against your survival. Teachers will explain how your armor made you invincible, while completely missing the point that your armor made you miserable. You'll become a textbook example of everything you actually weren't. The cruel joke continues even after extinction. Your evolutionary mistakes become celebrated as evolutionary triumphs. Your biological failures become examples of biological success. Your life of misery becomes a story of prehistoric glory. Even death can't free you from the fundamental unfairness of your existence. Scientists will spend grant money trying to understand how you moved, fed, and reproduced, never quite grasping that the answer to all these questions is poorly, with great difficulty, and probably not very often. Your biomechanics will be studied by researchers who assume there must be some elegant solution to the problems your body design created, when the reality is that there was no solution at all. Computer simulations will attempt to model your movement patterns, feeding behaviors, and combat capabilities. These digital recreations will work better than you ever did, because programmers will optimize your design in ways that evolution never managed to achieve. Virtual, you will be everything real you could never be. Efficient, effective, and actually capable of basic locomotion. The irony reaches peak levels when your species becomes a symbol of prehistoric power and resilience. T-shirts will feature your image alongside slogans about strength and determination. Your likeness will appear on everything from lunchboxes to car decals, representing qualities that you never possessed and achievements you never accomplished. You'll become a brand based on false advertising. Theme park attractions will recreate your habitat, complete with animatronic versions of you that move with grace and purpose. Visitors will experience a sanitized version of your ecosystem where you're portrayed as the dominant force, when in reality you were barely a participant. These artificial environments will show you thriving in conditions where you actually suffered. Your DNA, if any is ever recovered, will be studied with the hope of understanding your successful adaptations. Scientists will look for the genetic keys to your defensive capabilities, never realizing that these same genes were essentially a biological suicide note written in genetic code. Your genome will be treated as a treasure map when it's actually a warning label. The final insult to your memory comes when other species are compared to you as a standard of defensive evolution. Future discoveries will be measured against your armor thickness, your spike development, and your overall defensive strategy. You'll become the benchmark for biological protection, when you should be the example of why biological protection can go too far. Even your name becomes a monument to misunderstanding. Ankylosaurus sounds impressive and powerful, evoking images of strength and invincibility. The reality of what that name represents, a creature trapped by its own defenses and defeated by its own adaptations, never quite makes it into popular consciousness. Your nomenclature is more successful than your biology ever was. The scientific community will eventually realize the truth about your existence, but by then, your popular image will be so entrenched that correcting the record becomes impossible. You'll join the ranks of prehistoric creatures whose public perception bears no resemblance to their actual lived experience. Your true story will become a footnote to your fictional legacy. And perhaps that's the most fitting end to your evolutionary tragedy. Even in death, even as a fossil, Even as a subject of scientific study, you can't escape the fundamental pattern that defined your entire existence. Looking impressive while being completely dysfunctional, appearing successful while actually failing, and being remembered for everything you weren't rather than everything you actually were. So there you have it, the complete and utterly depressing story of why being born as an Ankylosaurus was essentially winning the worst possible lottery in the history of life on Earth. You were trapped in a body that prioritized looking tough over actually being functional, doomed to spend your entire existence as a walking contradiction that impressed everyone except the laws of physics and basic biology. Next time someone tells you they wish they could be a dinosaur, maybe suggest they